Missy, can you hear us?
Yep, hello. I can hear
Hello.
you.
Seems lately like one of you guys have been gone. Somebody's been gone at some point the last.
I'd like to call this meeting of the Kenmore Planning Commission to order. It is Tuesday, September 2nd at 7 p.m. Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Commissioner LaSalle,
Here.
Commissioner Macias,
Here.
Commissioner Olson,
Here.
Commissioner Dorian,
Here.
Commissioner Vanderland,
Here.
Vice Chair Thompson,
Vice Chair Thompson's excused.
Chair Banashinsky.
Here. Right now we will have a reading of our land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge that the city of Kenmore is situated upon the ancestral lands of the Snohomish, Snoqualmie, Soxhawtla, Duwamish, Stillaguamish, Tulalip, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and other tribes who are part of the Coast Salish peoples. We recognize and express our deepest respect for their enduring stewardship and profound relationship with this land, which they have cherished and protected since time immemorial. We honor the First Peoples, acknowledge their vibrant cultures, and commit ourselves to learning from their wisdom in our journey to promote justice, equity, and mutual understanding. We pledge to stand alongside these communities in acknowledging past injustices and working towards a future that respects and celebrates the diverse heritage of this land.
Please join me in rising for the flag salute. Is there anyone signed up for public comment tonight?
There is no one signed up.
All right. We will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the consent agenda. I move that we adopt the consent agenda by unanimous consent. Is there anyone opposed? The consent agenda is adopted unanimously. The next item on our agenda is review of our draft pros plan. So, hi, Todd.
Hello, good evening. This evening, I'm joined again by Julie and Missy, who's remote. Julie's here present. Tom is off for the next couple of meetings, so we'll continue the conversation. I know there was a couple of questions on some of the facilities. We do have a graphic that we can share with regards to the post office site, and I know there was questions about potential parking and that, so we'll put that up. Also, I sent you all an email just this afternoon, along with your comments and questions regarding the drafts, which is now in your preferred format, which will be a little easier to hopefully track those comments and changes as we go along over the next 3 weeks or so. Think about, you know, some programmatic things and ideas. Julie's here to help facilitate and answer any of those questions, as well as Missy too, with regards to cultural and art. So since we have both of them here joining tonight, I encourage you to kind of get them involved in the conversations tonight, and we'll utilize their resources and expertise. So I'll leave it up to the chair to kind of start our meeting, and if you want to how you want to approach this, if you want to go through certain pages, or if the commission have certain comments and questions, or if you want to kind of jump into specific areas with regards to and any of the chapters of the pros element.
All right, fellow commissioners, let's organize ourselves and how we're going to work today before we begin. Does anyone have a preference for how we approach things tonight? I think last time we didn't really get to the goals, policies, and objectives, so we could start there at a page-by-page walkthrough.
Sure.
Okay.
See that okay on the screen? Yeah, looks good. So the pretty much the bulk of these have not been changed to date. So as Tom mentioned at our last meeting, we purposely left this to be updated last, but many of these probably still apply, but there might be ones, if you take a closer look, that may not be applicable anymore. We haven't gone through this extensively because the bulk of the efforts have been in all the other chapters. So if you do have specific comments or questions, please let us know. Commissioner Macias did send me some comments, which I've incorporated for our next draft for consideration. So thank you for sending those. But yeah, I'm open for you know, conversation, if you want to go walk one by one through the goals and objectives for each of these, and we can see if you guys have any comments or feedback.
Yeah, let's go page by page.
Yeah.
That seems to work well for us. Does anybody have any questions or comments about anything on the first page?
And just for context on this first one, as you know, we talked about this a little bit last week regarding the water walk. So that would be that connection along the lake waterfront, and then connecting to Lockwood Park. So we I think collectively said that this concept of the water walk still makes sense and is still applicable. But if there's anything we need to make some minor modifications to these policies, we can do that.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, I was wondering if we had any language, or if the commission had any ideas for language around adding a policy or modifying one of these policies in here to make it more clear around some of the restoration and preservation of waterfront. I think we discussed a little bit last time, the desire to have a water walk, but also the desire not necessarily to put the water walk above preservation of shoreline for natural benefits. I'm not sure I've got great language, but that was something I noticed on my reading.
Oh, is that is that a question to me?
That was-
I think that's
It
for
seemed
all
like a
of
more
us.
open-ended question
was-
to the commission.
Yeah.
It was very
My
open-ended.
apologies.
No, no worries. It was very open-ended to the commission. I think the policy, to try and maybe give a little bit more of a nudge on this, the policy in particular that I was noticing was the P 1.1.4, identify and prioritize undeveloped and underdeveloped waterfront properties in the city's central core to consider for acquisition. And when I read that, I guess I'm thinking on waterfront properties that are undeveloped or underdeveloped, maybe we don't want to develop them. Maybe we want to keep them for natural purposes or enhance and restore those places. That doesn't mean the city should not acquire them, especially in the intent of trying to get a connected path that's parallel to the Burke-Gilman Trail around there. But instead just maybe adding, I believe there's other policies further down that kind of get at restoration and preservation. So I don't want to say that we shouldn't identify these parcels. I think like Lake Point, for instance, might be a parcel that would fall under this policy potentially, right? So yeah, I'm not quite sure if we need to make any changes there, but I more just wanted to ask.
I mean, yeah, if you see a kind of an overlap between the two sections, certainly we can adjust as needed, but I think this one really is getting at specifically the water walk itself. And I think that there's a broader section below, and apologies, I'm not going to restart this now. Nice. That was, thanks for interrupting. If there's another, section below that kind of talks about what you're getting at, Commissioner, I think that might be, appropriate to keep. But if they're specific to this, we can certainly modify or add one, so.
I'll think about it more.
Yeah.
I'm not wedded to anything at this moment.
Commissioner Dorian, and then I have a question.
One comment on Commissioner Olson's point, and then I have a separate point as well. I wonder whether with the restoration aims, something in there around policy P1 1.5, we could mitigate that a bit, because it does suggest that all we're going to be doing when key properties become available is looking for public access opportunities. We might want to mitigate that a little bit. I'm not sure of the verbiage at this point. The other comment I had is just some of the wording, making sure it's kind of an ongoing aim. I think policy P-1.1.2 reads a bit like something was missing from that, because it looks like something that could be done quite quickly. So, which I don't think is the intent. I think it's closer to like identify and prioritize for acquisition or something along those lines. Because just inventorying and identifying feels a bit of a small aim. Yeah, I think those are my 2 points.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, actually, 1.1.2, I'm almost wondering if that one is missing identify public and private parcels and barriers or something along those lines to a waterfront connection, right? Like if it's a particular private parcel, what are the barriers associated with those parcels? Is it housing residential? Is it a long-term industrial use? That's kind of how I read that one, but it's not explicitly stated, to your point.
Mm-hmm.
This is the question that I had. I feel like I'm missing some historical context that is making it more difficult for me to evaluate this objective section than it would if I had it. And maybe Commissioner Vanderlyn, since I think maybe you may have been around during previous discussions, you maybe could help us, or I don't know, Todd, if you have if Debbie has infused some of this in your brain. But what was the previous commission thinking about in terms of the Kenmore Water Walk? Like, I feel like maybe there was a plan or a vision that I wasn't part of that conversation, and so I'm not sure what that was or is. And I scrolled through looking to see if I could find some kind of a plan in the appendix, and I felt like maybe at one time there was, but I didn't see one in the packet tonight.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner.
I'll share
Vanderlyn.
what I remember from the deep, dark past. Yes, we did tackle this in a previous PROS plan. And what the discussion was around was the idea that with Lake Point and things that were then being contemplated around Swamp Creek, that we had this kind of disjointed opportunity to create some paths and some hiking trails and whatnot. So we had extensive conversation about that. What I'll just say, I think we stumbled over, but led us away from having any kind of really concrete goals and objectives on this, was realizing, one, you had private property issues involved here. There was comment from Department of Ecology about, well, if you're going to do that, you're also going to be crossing some natural areas. You're also going to be crossing some other zoning types. You're going to have to address the issue of, do you really want to have people use these areas? And if, to what extent do you want that? And do you begin talking about trails versus boardwalks versus, cutouts for oversights? There was a lot to be contemplated there, and it was just too early days. So what you ended up with is what I think we have here, which was the concept that we wanted to look at ways to be able to link the city using natural trails, but we needed to have some more discussion about some of what the potential impacts would be, and also how would you go about doing that, linking these areas together. Remember, this predates the Burke-Gilman Trail work that happened. It predated a lot of things. The Lake Point project basically fell apart as these discussions were going about. So that's the background I could give you right now. I think we've come forward in time. So maybe we have a little bit more concept about what it is we want to ultimately end up with, which may help direct some decision-making. But I think that's where we probably would need to start, saying, okay, what are we really talking about here? Is it a trail similar to Burke-Gilman? Is it a less intensive trail? Is it a natural area observation, sort of low impact? How would you, if it was low impact, how would you do that? There's a lot of expert advice I think that has to be taken in order particularly to get to the latter piece. And I'll stop there because I'll just say more than I probably should.
Well, that was really helpful. Thank you, Commissioner Vanderlyn.
Welcome.
Commissioner Macias?
I guess maybe that's where we still are, since the goal, the overarching goal is provide waterfront access, and then we kind of cascade down to water walk, and then there is a master plan. But I'm assuming at this point, we're not expected to create a master plan for that specific area. So I'm wondering, as long as we know that that's still a goal, an objective at some point, do we leave that in there, knowing that there is something in this nebulous, but we're not completely sure? And then my second comment is that inventory and identify, I would be cautious to note prioritize specific parcels in that, because they are private parcels. And I think if you start prioritizing them, those private owners of those parcels might have some questions on why we're looking at their particular piece first or last or when. And I would be nervous about including that sort of prioritization.
I think I'll just make one comment to that. So last week, you recall Tom showing a map with various trail options. And I think it's still important to have very high level maps like that. It may not be precisely where the trail is going to go, but if you remember, if we don't show that in the overall plan, then that means that we're not contemplating, therefore it's not in the, you know, I want to say the 6-year CFP. Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I know we want to make sure it's in that 20-year cycle. So I hear what you're saying, Commissioner, but I also think we want to at least, you know, identify something on a map that says, okay, within this corridor, we're considering a water walk. And I think that's fair to show that, and whether it's like a, you know, a bubble or just a loose line or something to that nature. But I agree with you that we don't want to pinpoint, just like when we were talking about the specific parks or picnic tables, you know, the icons and that, we don't want to say, okay, right here is where we're going to say in this general area, we think that a park might be considered because there's a gap, but we don't want to pick a specific place. And I think that's valid still. Yeah.
Commissioner Dorian, and then Commissioner Vanderlyn.
I have kind of a taking a step back question. So these goals, looking back to the previous PROS plan, come from like a higher level vision and goals. So the 7 goals that we've got here. If we just looked at the goals, the 7 goals, are those still our goals? Do we think? And are they expressed in the order that we would want them to be expressed in if we're thinking of priority?
Do you have any thoughts about that, or was that just an open question for us to think about?
Well, just things like some of the things we've been talking about, like creating pocket parks. I'm not sure where that would fit within the existing set of goals, because none of the goals really have an element to them about creating new parks. There's preserve, restore, maintain, and enhance, which I guess enhance could mean create a new park. But mostly in relation to the park, it's just about balancing what we've already got, which maybe that is what we need to do, but it's just interesting that stood out to me when I look at the goals at that level. The waterfront being the top piece as well. I mean, obviously we have to be guided by feedback that we get from the community and what we're seeing in surveys, but I would want to understand again a bit more about what that means now that we have done the work down at Logbim and we've got Tilachudis. So yeah, and is that, given that work's happened, does that mean providing waterfront access is still our #1 goal, or are there other things that we would want to bring higher in priority? Yep.
Those are really good questions, and I look forward to hearing commissioners' thoughts as you have them. And for now, we'll go to Commissioner Vanderlyn.
Yeah, I'm reluctant to step on your comments because I think they're really good. We need to come back to them. I wanted to go back to the water walk for a second. This is clearly an aspirational goal, one that we can only achieve over time and probably incrementally. So I think having some kind of a map that laid out, these are the trails, this is what's out here, here's the potential, highest potential places we could do this. And at the same time in doing that, identify where the gaps are. I think that's something that would be useful as we go forward in incrementally identifying where the opportunities are and how we would go about them. Just an example, I think if we had a development of Lake Point the way it's being described, there's a major opportunity there in order to be able to build in some sort of connection between what's already there and what's on either side of it. But it would have to be identified up front and developed into whatever new master plan. So I think the type of map that Tom is talking about would be very useful for folks going into the future for that reason.
Commissioner LaSalle?
I'll echo what my fellow commissioners have just said. I think with regards to the priorities, I would benefit from knowing if we are the drivers of defining those priorities, or if those priorities are essentially council's priorities and we put it in place. To speak about the water walk, if that is the #1 priority, in that case, that's the first thing we should be talking about. And so far, that's not necessarily what we've talked about. And in terms of enforcing the priorities as well, it speaks to what you mentioned, the understanding the needs. If if we are in charge of defining what are the priorities, I'm going to sound so much like a broken record, we go back to, okay, but what are the unmet needs? And if we decide that the Kenmore Water Walk is the #1 priority, as not driven by council, but driven by our own vision, then it has to be backed up by unmet needs, which we currently don't have, which I've been asking for. But so essentially two options: either priorities are defined by council, in which case the order, we defer to them for the order, or we are in charge of those priorities, but in which case we need to have an understanding of the unmet needs that the city is experiencing to be able to define and rank appropriately those priorities. I don't know which ones they are. My go-to approach would be that priorities would be set by council and we enable them, in which case those priorities maybe are fine, maybe are completely off, but in order for us to improve upon them, we need to have council's input.
Commissioner Vanderland?
I'll just tag on to the priority discussion, which I think should be high priority. But what I had in mind was, I think if we look back at some of the other work we've done on other parts of the plan, and we think particularly about economic development, how we develop something like a water walk has huge potential for economic development within the city. Again, I'll use the example of Lake Point. If you have that sort of amenity, and depending again, it's what level is this going to be? Is it going to be a low impact, high impact? How are we going to do that? Those are decisions that need to be made, and they may not be the same everywhere, even within the same trail. But I think having some awareness that one of our, whether it's a goal here or a principle, is that we need to take into account what the potential economic impact would be of developing it. And that may help us with some of our priorities.
Commissioner Vanderland, if you would like to, you are welcome to shift closer to us if you would like. It's up to you. You just feel very far away from me, but if you prefer that, that's fine.
It's not personal.
You know, I know. One comment that I'm in agreement with a lot of what has been said so far on the dais. I think for me, I still want to dig more into the idea of the Kenmore Water Walk. I wonder, I feel like we have done as a community a lot of work on access to the waterfront. Somebody mentioned that before, that Log Boom Park was kind of redeveloped. Tolakati's Park was developed. I think those were two major water access projects. And I think that perhaps this was written, the idea of the Kenmore Water Walk, before we had done those projects. And so I could be wrong. No,
Right.
okay, I'm right. And so it feels like if the objective is providing waterfront access, then although we have not created a Kenmore Water Walk, we have significantly increased waterfront access in our city. And so maybe from that perspective, the Kenmore Water Walk wouldn't necessarily be our top goal, given that I know we don't have an exact accounting of what our gaps are just yet, but I do feel like we have some sense. We know that we are under-resourced when it comes to providing indoor recreational opportunities, and we know we're under-resourced when it comes to providing indoor spaces for arts and culture. And since those are our bigger gaps right now, perhaps it makes sense to elevate those as higher priorities than this idea of the Kenmore Waterworks. So that's Water Walk, excuse me. So that's one thought that I have. Another is that I think it would be interesting to dig back into the idea of the waterwork a bit more and examine it now that we are, I don't know how many years we are from this having been written. I'm guessing like 10, 12, 15, 20, I don't know, a long time. And maybe we would conceive now from where we are and the experience we've had, a different way to engage with connectivity. I would be really interested in that. Perhaps I would love to think about I think the idea of connectivity is super important. And also we might perhaps think about it more broadly and think about not only creating connections like right along the water, but perhaps like how can our built infrastructure interact with our natural environment to create connectivity? Can we incorporate safe streets, for example, or shared streets, sorry, into our ideas about connectivity? So again, not just along the water, but perhaps there are places along 181st where we could create some shared streets and they could be part of a connectivity walk around we're not saying this is all around downtown, but that's kind of what it seems like to me if we're thinking about like from Log Boom to Tolakatis Park, that's sort of in the downtownish TOD area. So those are some of the things that I'm interested in. And in part, that's because I think there are opportunities to think about economic development that could perhaps be better integrated into thinking about connectivity between our parks and our businesses if we thought more broadly than just the water. And then also for the reason that Commissioner Olson that you pointed out is that I do think that I don't want to think about nature and our natural environment as a museum that we cannot touch. However, I do think that we need to be very mindful about how we are developing near it, and that for decades and decades and decades, we've had the approach that kind of like our needs for access trump the needs that the ecosystem has for natural processes. So I think it would behoove us to just think a little bit more about like, how can we provide some access while also honoring the fact that these rivers and creeks and streams and wetlands they need their own space to provide the resources to us that they do, because we need them. We need them too. I'll stop there. Commissioner Olson.
I'm glad you brought connectivity because that was kind of my thought reading, or another thought I had on this goal in particular. And we're calling it waterfront access. And it's more like a waterfront tour is kind of what it feels like to me. Like you're walking along it, you're not necessarily accessing the water. It helps you connect to places where you might access the water from. I also strongly agree with thinking about how we connect those in. And so to me, I'm kind of thinking almost more like a loop system where you've got some higher impact trails in key parcels or areas, say, I'll use Lake Point for an example, where you're going to expect higher usage, and then trying to kind of maybe protect or enhance some of the other natural areas between Twahadis, and instead looping back around, but connecting in with the existing trails. And the other piece on connectivity that I think that this might better address if we, talk about improve waterfront connectivity to access points or something along those lines. I don't love that language, but something along those lines. I think there may also need to be a policy, or may want to consider a policy at least, looking at connecting rhododendron. I think we discussed that last time. And I really like the idea, this is me personally, but I personally really, really like the idea of some additional north-south connection, because we are bottlenecked at Juanita Way. There are a lot of challenges crossing the Sammamish River. There are a lot of environmental implications crossing the Sammamish River, but I think providing an additional connection in that way could be very beneficial, connecting Brew Row further to the east, up on Northeast 170th and Simons Road, kind of over by the school in those areas. And that I would not want to put a vehicle connection there, but I could see I think we've already planned it out in some other documents, and we've got some locations where we could tie into, and that would let us expand this objective to do that. I also agree this would not necessarily be my number one priority. Are these ordered in order of priority? Because I just assumed that these were just a bunch of policies, but I could see them being interpreted that way. And if they're going to be interpreted that way, I would think maybe we try and consider that a little bit more, but frankly, I'm not sure.
Commissioner Vanderland and then Commissioner Macias.
Well, this discussion is really bringing me back to some very earlier discussions we had. It's amazing how good minds come up with a lot of the same thoughts. And I'll speak just for myself. One of the observations I had in the earlier discussions was that there was really a distinction that should be made between what we're calling connectivity, and called it the same thing then, and then the idea of we want to open up in some way the nature areas and our areas within our community so we could link people's access to parks and to rec. At that time, connectivity, what was really in people's minds, including myself, was there was a lot of talk at that time about what was going to happen over here. And it was deeply related to economic development. And one of the deficits we had in recognizing the city was the lack of north-south connection, but also particularly how do you link the waterfront, which is a major potential, not only recreation, but economic asset, to what we want to build up here. If we really want to develop a dedicated downtown, you want that to be linked to the waterfront. That gives it power. So there was a lot of those discussions but then there was also the discussion about, well, yeah, but this is a pros plan, parks, recreation, open space. How does that connectivity relate to this particular part of the plan? It's more related to economic development. And that's, I think, again, one of the things that I continually want to harp on is the interconnection between the different parts of the plan are critical here. And I think there was a time when we could kind of treat these somewhat more isolated, but I think that day is past. And so I think that's something we need to think about and certainly put on a tickler file for the next time we go through the economic development, is we need to talk seriously about connectivity and how we're going to foster that. But specifically within the pros plan, it's probably a more limited discussion, at least for what's appropriate for the pros plan.
Commissioner Macias?
A couple things. I'm going to try to channel my inner Debbie here. I know that in the top of the goals and policies, it's saying, this is part of the framework. Our goals and policies are framework. They don't change over time unless community values or conditions make it necessary. And I understand why that is. If we change them every 6 years, we won't be able to sink our teeth into something before it changes again. So I think there's value with keeping these goals unless there's something that doesn't make sense anymore at all completely, to not change that. And I do feel like these are not categorized as far as prioritized goals. I think they're just an overall goal. And I'm wondering if it makes more sense just to look at policy and add policy notes. In P2, we have safe routes to parks, recreations. I think we could really dig in there and maybe add some policy goals for connectivity and make sure that that's a little bit more well-rounded. Same with access points and natural environment. I'm sure there's something, reserve, goal P3 is preserve, restore, and maintain. And maybe that's a place where we tighten up our policy and make it a little more aware of our natural environment and add something so that as we're looking at every single park plan, that policy follows it.
Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, so a few things that I heard, so just immediate because it's in my brain and you just spoke, I'm sure, is that I think that your point's well taken. And if you think back of when we did the comprehensive plan and all the different elements that we did over the course of the last, whatever it was, year and a half or so, that I don't think, now maybe some of those might have been a higher on the list, but I don't think any of those were particularly emphasized more than the other. They were part of the collective of the particular element that they were in. However, with that said, what I'm hearing is that we want to make sure, and particularly Commissioner Vanderlyn, you said, making sure that we're interlinking those other applicable elements and those things. So what I would suggest lightly suggest to the commission for maybe next time, and Debbie will also be here as well, is how some of those policies that we worked on collectively over that period of the comp plan and those ones that are applicable to these, particularly with regards to access, or one that came to mind, Chair, is the green, when you were speaking about natural environment, is the green trail that ULI was talking to us about and how you interact that with the waterfront. So there's going to be some of those types of policies and objectives that were throughout the other elements, and we might be able to draw some of those in to the pros plan and element. And then lastly, before I forget, is one suggestion that I'm going to propose to Debbie before too long is, I think the goals and policies that we have here will be applicable to what we put in the pros element, or if not identical, because I don't want to have two separate or the commission probably doesn't want to have two separate conflicting goals and policies. And one thing that came to mind when I was reviewing some examples, and in particular, the one that Beckwith worked on, which was shoreline, what they did is if you look, their pros element and pros plan goals and policies are identical verbatim. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So it would be good that we have a full understanding of what these need to be so that they can be basically mirrors of themselves with regards to the pros plan and the pros element. And the pros element would be, therefore, we're referring to the pros plan for the full discussion, but you have the pros elements, goals and policies were basically verbatim of the pros plan. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm kind of mumbling on, but my objective here, or our objective, I would think, is to make sure that we're consistent across both of those pros element and pros plan.
I think Commissioner Macias raised a good point about the goals not typically changing. And I see that the goal for one is provide waterfront access, and then the water walk is an objective. So it makes sense to me that the goal, providing waterfront access, stays the same. And then we might think about is developing a Kenmore water walk, how we would like to meet that goal. So I do agree that providing waterfront access is a broad enough goal that it seems durable. But then I would also encourage us to think about, with the objectives, how we want to do that. And I do really like, my brain also, although I didn't say it, Todd, was also thinking about the ULI Green Loop. And I do think that this would be more powerful if we could integrate those ideas, the ideas we talked about in the economic development element in this one. And yeah, I think not thinking about our environments as so separate, I think integrating them and connecting them will make our community stronger. Commissioner Dorian?
Just responding to the point about goals and them being immutable, which I know wasn't exactly what was said, but that's kind of the way it seems sometimes. Just the point that in the last PROS plan, that description of goals was not shared. And I think sometimes we are, because I read other comprehensive plans for fun, it's what kind of thing I do for fun. I don't see that sort of description in all other comprehensive plans. I think somewhat that is a preference of Kenmore that has come through sometimes, and that we should feel able to shift goals like reasonably. You can't shift every year moving people around, but I do think we have to be able to take a look at the goals as well, because otherwise you just cut them, many, many times until they lose their original intent. So yeah, that just my perspective on that one as well.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, I'm glad you said what you said, David. That all said, I still think I've heard repeatedly waterfront access is a priority from community members. And frankly, I think I was kind of mixing up the goal and the objective in my head a little bit there on that one. That said, I think I kind of question the objective, but not entirely. I feel like I would almost rather that develop a Kenmore water walk almost be like a policy. And then have that objective instead be develop, coordinate with the transportation element or economic development, something along those lines, to connect or to provide waterfront access in a coordinated manner or coherent manner with the rest of our transportation network, and think about how those trails connect. I need to wordsmith that and think about that a bit more. But I think to Commissioner Macias's point, I was more focused, I think, on that objective really than the goal of waterfront access. I think there is a question still to me around, the balance of waterfront access versus natural space, but I think that's a separate goal that we have. So And even in here, I think we've got some language around how to retain that.
So I think there's a lot of good comments and feedback. I think it'd be beneficial to revisit this one at the next meeting and maybe give it some additional thought if you have, because this one seems like a fairly broad enough topic, but also maybe some malleability as well on how we approach it. So I think just bring your ideas and thoughts again for this one, and yeah, we can continue to massage that first goal and objective, so.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
I'm not sure if we're at this point in the agenda, but after discussion of mutability and immutability, I do have a proposal or a suggestion for a new goal. Take that now or wait till after we got through what we've already got on the page?
Do you think you will remember it?
I wrote it down.
You wrote it
because I knew
down.
I wouldn't.
Okay, let's get through, well, let's see if we can move through these in a timely way and then do new things. If it seems like we're not doing so and we're like at the point where we're taking a break, I will come back around to that new idea. Okay, so are we would consider ourselves through goal 1? Look at goal 2. Any commissioners have any comments about this one? Anything in goal 2, any of the objectives or policies? Commissioner Olson?
I almost feel like, sorry, going back to goal 1, policy or objective E1-1, develop a Kenmore water walk would almost fit better under this section. I mean, it's more inter-park potentially, but we're talking about development on the waterfront and routes around the waterfront. So maybe that kind of addresses some of what I was thinking about on the previous one. Anyways, that's all I've got at the moment.
Commissioner Dorian?
A similar comment to the first one, first goal or objective. Some of the policies feel a bit kind of point in time versus something that would be ongoing, wherever the languages occur. I think the first one I was looking at where, again, it's just identifying, where is it, goal P2? It'll be further, because where did we get to?
Yeah,
Oh,
we're
you're
in-
on
we're in
P2,
goal
yeah,
2, yeah,
Yeah, goal
P2.
two. I'm looking on the screen here now. There we go. Yeah, prepare a safe routes plan, which maps a network of pedestrian, but it just feels like that's one, if you're preparing it, you're doing it one time instead of like maintaining or something else that feels like that is a ongoing thing. Just said with the context that, you know, these are lifted and shifted at the moment from something that was created 5 years ago. So in that context, if we were going to prepare a safe routes plan, you know, so it's more like, how do we shift these a bit so they don't sound like one-time projects and they're ongoing policies? Because the second one's good on that front, like identify and create opportunity. Like you can continue to do that. Some of the language of these I think feels more like one time.
Commissioner Macias?
Should I or do you want me to chime in on things that I emailed to you at this point, or do you want to wait? Do you want to
Sure,
surprise?
yeah, no,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. I was like, I don't want to be redundant. If I had a question on policy P2 1.2, I know that, and this might not be the correct policy, or maybe we add, there isn't any specific verbiage in any of these policies regarding trailhead access or parking for trailhead access. And I know that is something we had discussed before, so I had noted that to either add to to 1.2, specifically calling that out, or add another policy that we continue to pursue options for trailhead access parking.
Anyone else on goal 2? No, okay, I will say for my own part that I don't love policy P 2.1.4. I would love to think about north-south connectivity for our community, but I do not feel that it needs to be along the creek. I would love for us to be talking about how we can use the areas that we have developed already and where there is already concrete to reuse some of that space in a different way. Like I'm just going to say something that's totally wild that probably would make some people in the listening public nervous. I don't mean this as something that I am going to push for, but just as an example of a way that we could be thinking differently. Instead of thinking, oh, if we go north-south, if people, not in cars, are going to be going north-south, it must be along the water. What if we made 73rd one-way north and 68th one-way south? And there, when we took half of it and made half of each of those roads safe transportation corridors for pedestrians and people who are on wheels. Just for example, again, this is not something that I am going to be pushing actively for, but just to get our thinking pushed a little bit outside the words that we have here, I feel like there is a lot of concrete and asphalt in our community that we could be repurposing for people if that is one of our goals. Commissioner LaSalle.
Thanks, yeah. There you go, thanks. Yeah, I definitely would second that because when I was reading it, I didn't overall have comments on priority 2, but this just logistically, essentially the Swamp Creek corridor is a zigzag that goes from side to side on 73rd. Outside of 73rd, which already exists, I don't really see what we could do beyond because the parts that aren't on 73rd or around 73rd are marshes. So if we are going to remove one, I think we either reword this or we remove this one. Also thinking that north-south, to Commissioner Olson's comments, limiting north-south to just Swamp Creek or essentially the northern part of Kenmore forgoes entirely the concept of connecting both north and south across the Sammamish River. So yes, agree.
Commissioner Olson.
This is an interesting one. This is in utility design, typically want to avoid longitudinal conflicts in priority of direct crossings. And so the other thing that I'm looking at here is my mind isn't really that there's a huge north-south issue along Swamp Creek. It really seems more like there's an east-west gap to me at that particular location. It's a lot harder to get from 80th without going on the highway over towards 73rd and downtown. And so I think we've got kind of a weird mishmash of north-south connectivity issues and east-west connectivity issues, depending on which part of Kenmore we're looking at. So I would almost be interested in maybe adjusting this one to read, identify, and develop plans to connect gaps in our corridor to improve connectivity and route directness or something along those lines to our parks. I also think that generally that's going to minimize our impacts to natural spaces and environmental regions because you're going to have one spot where you might have a crossing or a conflict as opposed to you're right next to it the entire way. I also have ridden on a couple trails that are in wetlands and they can be fairly nice. You can also end up eating a lot of bugs, which you might not want to do. And they can get flooded is another concern I've had. And so making these, if we want some of these spaces to double as connections, this is more focused on open space and access, but if we want some of these options to be more impactful trails that are for the purposes kind of more in line with the transportation element, frankly, making sure that they do have access even in a storm or some of these other events, I think is also important. Yeah.
That's Commissioner Olson, that reminds me of a thought that I had when I was thinking about this, this plan this week, is that I would love it if we could start thinking about, I think oftentimes we think about putting in infrastructure that we then have to protect from the creek and the wetland. It would be nice if we could start thinking about, like, how can we protect the creek and the wetland from infrastructure that we might want to put there? Instead of putting in infrastructure that we then have to protect, because if we don't, we can't use it. Appreciate that comment. Thank you. Okay, a policy P2.1.5 is also a tricky one for me, because I think I agree with Commissioner Olson that the kind of the connectivity across east-west in North Kenmore is challenging because of Swamp Creek and because of the big wetland. And I think it's really important that we think about that and we provide some better options. And I'm not sure what that is. And we have taken the toll pipeline trail out of other plans. We took it out of the transportation element. So I don't know, it's not consistent to leave it in here, but also we do need some linkages east-west. I don't have anything other than that, I guess. Commissioner Olson?
So one thing that I heard rattling around a while back was looking at developing kind of on the backside of properties abutting 522. It's still next to the wetland. There are potential flooding concerns. I think some of those could be mitigated in how it's designed and built. The reason I like that idea is some of those areas are built up already, and we're looking at redevelopment in those locations. And it provides a way to shift the frontage and the space away from the highway and towards Swamp Creek and some of those places. We'll still have stuff fronting the highway, but that is not as nice of a connection as going straight through the wetland from an east-west connectivity standpoint, but it's still better than what we currently have. And it is a much more comfortable connection because it would be separated from vehicles, kind of like if we went straight through Swamp Creek. So that is one option. And then I also think with that, looking at, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the road. There's a road that connects off 73rd to 80th that we already have, and looking at that road as well as another parallel option. So you don't necessarily get, one nice connection straight along 181st, but you go down a little bit to the south, depending on which part of 80th you're trying to get to, or you go a little bit to the north on 73rd. This feels more transportation element to me at this point, so I'm going to stop. I think the thing for this element that I would think about is the trail not south of Swamp Creek, I guess, because Swamp Creek kind of goes through that area, but north of 522, kind of by those existing parcels, private parcels, as redevelopment occurs in those areas. 192nd is the other connection. So not a perfect fix to that, but I think one that kind of balances.
Yeah,
these
it's not
constraints.
bad. I actually use it for that reason all the time, and it's not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And if you're trying to get to Bothell, 192nd is pretty good. So.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I also had been wondering if we could think about an east-west connection in the north part of Kenmore closer to 181st somehow, because it's more developed. And then also, I think the crossing over Swamp Creek is shorter because it's more developed. So we would be disrupting less natural area, but still providing that connection. And if we're thinking like visionary long-term, what I would love is for there to be high-speed rail on 522. And so if we had trails that were close, I don't know, that would just kind of all tie things together if we're thinking like longer term. But you're right, this does kind of get into transportation element issues. Any other things on goal 2? How about goal 3? Commissioner Macias?
I had a comment on policy 3.2.2. I was wondering if the policy should include something about the cost in either annual budgeting or a timeline for reviewing these. Shorelines pros plan has something similar to like an annual, they note an annual basis or annually or biannually on when they are reviewing the equipment. So I was just wondering if we should put something in there as well so that we know. And then my second kind of follow-up question to that was the maintenance, the life cycle replacement schedule. Do we need to put something in place or note a policy if all of these fall at the same time? What takes priority? How do we categorize and prioritize those? Because we have some older parks. So I imagine if we do an accounting now, we'll see a lot that needs to be replaced at one time.
Commissioner LaSalle and then Commissioner Vanderlyn?
So for me, goal 3, I love. I feel as though the wording could be improved just because the ensuring quality recreational opportunities exist in the wording of goal 3 actually isn't reflected in the priorities. All of the priorities are about preserving the environment and the quality of the parks, for which I fully subscribe to. But if the goal is to do that and enhance built-in natural environments to ensure recreational opportunities, we're doing the preserve, restore, and maintain part just great. The enhance maybe, but only in terms of enhancing parks, but we're not at all addressing the quality recreational opportunities. Which again, we might not have to, because priority objective 4 is all about that. But just wanted to call out the fact that it's not consistent with the underlying policies.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Just an observation. When you begin to talk about maintaining the assets and whatnot, what you're really doing is you start talking about financial ability. And this is addressed in the last goal number 7, one of the probably wisest and best framed sections of the old plan. And that's where I would like to eventually give some suggestions about how we could enhance that.
Commissioner Dorian?
Obviously, I don't know this, but this is one example of where I feel like a goal has probably been added to multiple times over time, so it then loses its focus of what it was originally meant to be regarding. The policies, I generally, I like the policies. The one that seems to be missing something maybe to me, or is framed differently than the others, is the P-3.1.5. Because it starts with what is that, a verb? I'm too tired. Yeah, whereas the other ones start with more statements. And when we're saying develop a master plan, I guess this is a question, Todd. Can we have a master plan that isn't about a specific area? Because this seems to be more like about multiple areas that would have those characteristics.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. But we can certainly follow up with you.
Great.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yeah, on that one in particular, policy 3.1.5, Commissioner LaSalle, I think he just noticed that the objective for the policies here appears to be missing, which might be some of the goal versus objective piece there. So maybe just adding that. But then, sorry, related to the policy in particular, it almost seems to me like we could just strike opportunities for continuing and instead just say develop a master plan to a master plan for habitat and riparian corridor restoration and opportunities for public access or something along those lines. And maybe we make that more kind of intent-wise, kind of around the green corridor or some of the thoughts we've had around like a connected riparian corridor. Instead, I think we've got some ideas of these locations. I don't necessarily want to, maybe that's a separate policy and we amend or add a policy instead, talking about identifying opportunities for habitat and riparian corridor restoration that might be outside of what we're aware of currently or focused on currently. But I think like Swamp Creek corridor in particular and Sammamish River waterfront and some of the tributaries on the north side and south side, we know they exist and we want those things. And so actually having a master plan for things that we can implement in those locations may be good, especially for grants and the like.
Commissioner Dorian?
Yeah, just for context, I found that objective. So in the last prose point, objective P-3.1 is protect environmentally sensitive critical areas in parks and open spaces and provide opportunities for habitat restoration, enhancement, and public access. So I think that probably makes more sense of those policies, the -3.1.
Commissioner Macias, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if on policy 3.1.3, when developing parks create a balance between habitat restoration, particularly salmon habitat, if we want to insert language there, create a balance with an emphasis on habitat restoration, I don't know if we want to try to put language in there that specifically notes that that's our first priority, is habitat restoration instead of public access at the end.
Have you all been scrolling through the objectives? I think you have based on your comments, but have you all been scrolling through all of the objectives in under goal 3 as we've been talking? No. Does anyone need more time here with this one? Commissioner Olson?
I don't think I need more time. I do want to mention, it feels kind of in the opposite direction of habitat restoration and everything. It feels a little light on the built environment, ensuring quality recreational opportunities exist for the goal. And I know we've got stuff around maintenance and some of those items, but almost seems to me like maybe taking a look at some of the recreational aspects. I need to think on that more. I mostly just wanted to note it. So kind of opposite direction there a little bit. Yeah, and I think the missing objective, I'm not sure which of these I would put this under. It almost seems to me like we'd want to add an objective. Maybe, yeah, I keep kind of putting the goal as opposed to the objective for 3.1 instead. Yeah.
I might not be following you, Commissioner Olson, but what Commissioner Dorian just found about the change that seemed to happen with policy, I'm scrolling too much. With objective P 3.2, that it made more sense, the policies under it made more sense when it didn't include the attractive use. So that's what you read, right, Commissioner Dorian? Or am I on the
not
wrong
exactly.
one?
No, what?
No, goal P3, sorry.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. But there was a P-3.1. There's an objective in the previous material, so I think it just got left out here.
Ah,
That
yeah.
specifically has, so policy, all of the policies under P-3.1 are about protecting critical environments.
Yes,
Basically, that's where it is. And then 3.2 comes in and then has the
about use.
more of the amenities, I guess, get
Yeah.
put into place under 3.2.
Yes, go ahead.
Commissioner Olson, was your question related to the built environment? Is that addressed in 3.2.11, or are you talking about some other kind of infrastructure?
I think you are correct. It is in 3.2.11. Well, okay,
Maybe that's not in
kind
the
of.
right location.
It's kind of in there. I think a lot of these are focusing on sustainability, which is good, and either financial or environmental sustainability, but they aren't necessarily getting at what facilities we may need to add or evaluations of missing assets. And I think part of that might be our job on the Planning Commission, but at least having something in here explicitly along those lines, like, I don't know, I'll try and think of a example. If we have a huge increase in people using the skate park and we want to improve the skate park, do we have anything? Actually, there might be a policy on that. I'd have to think about that more. It seems we're very focused on the sustainability pieces, and I think those are good things to have, and I'm glad we have them. It feels like we're missing a little bit more of the built environment pieces, particularly. I'm thinking for things like fields and those types of places, which are really hard to cite in Kenmore. And part of the reason why I think it might be good to have a policy more focused on that, so that way when there are opportunities that come up, especially with things like redevelopment or large building roofs or something like that, that might double as space for this, being able to identify and have a policy that speaks to those places and says, identify opportunities for built environment recreational use to enhance our system or something along those lines. And I think that would further the goal. But yes, I think 3.211 gets at kind of what I'm talking about. I'm going to stop talking because I'm probably, yeah.
Commissioner Dorian?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, especially with the hangar. That changes how we think about built environments in relation to parks in Kenmore. And if we're thinking of building more community spaces like third spaces in that way, we would need to have policies about how we want to think about built parks, I guess.
I wonder if some of this might be addressed in goal 4. So why don't we move there and see, maybe not, but let's move to goal 4 and see if it's there. Commissioner LaSalle?
Not a huge fan of goal 4. No, I'm not a huge fan of goal 4. So just in general, we've talked a lot so far about what we need to implement for goal 4, but again, without the unmet needs. Goal 4, specifically the policy, I'm all for the objective, P41, but the policies themselves are a bit all over the place. There are some things that are very generic of acquiring potential areas and considering tools. And then afterwards, we have some very park-specific policies with Logboom Park, Rhododendron, and Wallace Swamp Creek and Twin Springs, which the improvements that we've been talking about go beyond those 4 parks. And also the conversations we've had with regards to the master plans and the visioning designs also don't match the reality. So if we go with update Wallace Swamp Creek Park adopted master plan and implement the improvements, great. Which ones and why? implement the rhododendron park boardwalk float and boathouse projects, except if I'm mistaken, those have been implemented, so we should remove it altogether. Implement the Logboom Park waterfront access and viewing project. The viewing project maybe not, depending on what we want to do, but everything else is there. So it's either non-specific or it deals with stuff that's already been done, or it is dealing with, it's dealing in specifics that we need to understand the unmet needs. So there's room for improvement, I feel.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, I do think this might be a better spot to shift some of these policies from 3.2, and maybe we make goal 3 more focused on natural environment. Although I don't know, it feels kind of natural to have built and natural environments because it just flows well. But I feel like they're kind of they're built and natural environments are related, but they are fundamentally different in how we approach them as a city in some ways. There's different considerations. I think goal 4 has some space for that. Especially in how it is identifying kind of more specifics, parcels and properties for implementation and looking at these particular aspects of the built environment. But it almost feels like it would still be almost another objective, maybe specific to human-oriented places or people-oriented places, something along those lines. Built environments for people to enjoy, and meeting the recreational needs that are met by our built environment. And I could see a policy in there like identify needs or identify and acknowledge needs as they come up, something along those lines. I'm gonna stop talking because I'm kind of just rambling now, but.
Commissioner Macias?
I have the same kind of issue with this particular one, although the goal is to create a balance, right, of passive and active recreation. So it's like, okay, the goal is, what are we doing in these parks? Is it passive? Is it active? Can we do both? So I think the goal is, right, the overarching goal is, what happens in these parks? So I like from policy P 4.1.8 down, and even 4.17, that in these parks, it includes, public art and cultural events. All those things make sense. And then everything above it just feels like there were items in previous plans that had things to do, and we just kind of stuck them here. So I agree, Commissioner Lissette, it just feels a little disjointed on what the goal is we want to include both active and like the items that we're doing in these.
Commissioner Dorian?
I would advocate for splitting the objective as well, because it mashes together protecting, maintaining and enhancing the existing parks. And then at the end, it kind of tacks on and acquire new land for new parks. I feel like that could be a separate objective, because I think we've also talked about new ways of enabling new parks now. So that's why I would suggest breaking that out, so we can bring more of that together about how we develop new parks without necessarily having to have the city acquire it all the time. Like the forget what it's called, the one by the Pulte Group development has a name now, doesn't it? But I think so. So that kind of thing, and smaller pocket parks, those kind of things. So I think it deserves its own objective.
I agree that some of the policies early on probably can be completely struck because we've already implemented them. I would also advocate that we might want to consider that master plans do need a refresh if they are of a certain age. just because community values and priorities change, and we don't want to be stuck doing something that we thought was a good idea 10 years ago if we don't think it's a good idea now. Twin Springs in particular is one that I think needs an update. Wallace needs an update. And then this is not a comment that I think is really actionable, but just a thought I have. I'm not sure that we can always provide a balance between passive and active recreational opportunities, because I think we have to be sensitive to what the land is telling us is an appropriate human activity there. So, for example, Wallace is a place where it's really hard to have a balance between passive recreation and an active recreation, because it is entirely either within the riparian area for Swamp Creek or wetland. This is really not a good place to put a pickleball court, for example, or a whatever kind of hard court, sports court. So I'm not sure how to handle that in an objective, other than to say that I do think we need to be sensitive to what the land is telling us an appropriate use would be. Commissioner Olson, it looked like you perhaps had something to say. Okay, would you like to? Go ahead, Commissioner Olson.
Yeah, it almost seems like going back to Commissioner Dorian's comment a while back about not necessarily being having immutable goals. This goal to me in particular seems like one where maybe we should be looking at the objective and maybe the built environment portion of the previous objective and kind of do the opposite, where it's less focused on natural environment, more focused on parks and built environment space. Maybe have a policy in here where we kind of nix some of these policies, and we have a policy that's implement master plans and another policy that's evaluate master plans every, I don't know, 10 years or whatever it is, or consider master plan reevaluation every 10 years, something along those lines, so it gets brought back up. And then I think having kind of two objectives, one with parks and one with more focused on the quality at those parks and the quality of potential parks, or identifying gaps in our recreational and open space areas that we would like to fill or consider addressing. Maybe we don't always address it, but at least have a place where we look at it or consider it and have that as a intentional policy. Yeah, I think earlier when I said I like goal 4 for that location, I think part of why I liked it is it seems a little amorphous at the moment. There's to Commissioner Banasinski's point, there's kind of like feels almost like a meaningless distinction to me between passive and active. I feel like I could define passive activities and active activities in both of these places, but at that point, I'm really just defining activities that apply to that particular park, whether that's Wallace Swamp Creek or something else. And there's going to be passive and active opportunities in most places if we make spaces that let people do that. And so instead focusing more on what's missing outside of that. So in going way back, this might be a good spot to also put things around cultural facilities and things along those lines as well. And maybe, I'm not quite sure what the language is. I'll noodle on that and probably email Todd here or something. Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to move on to goal 5? Yep. Seeing some nods. Let's look at goal 5. Commissioner Olson.
I retract my previous statement. This is where the cultural stuff should be. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, goal 5, provide equitable opportunities for diverse and affordable arts and recreation programs and community and cultural events. That is a great goal. I like that one. Is this a place is this the place where we would like to call on the expertise of Missy and, can you remind me of your name? Julie. I know last time we talked about different ways to integrate art into our parks and to have maybe a program where we're working with artists whose art gets sold after being in our parks for a certain amount of time, and there seemed to be a fair amount of interest among commissioners in that. Would you all like to explore that idea more in this goal? Go ahead, Commissioner Olson.
Yeah, I am interested in the idea. I think Commissioner Banisinski or Chair Banisinski, you brought up some of the challenges with that, which I think are real challenges. And I think this is something that would be more of a, in some places, that's an opportunity. I'm thinking especially indoor places, City Hall, the hangar, a future cultural center of some sort, resilience hubs or whatever we may have. Primarily, it seems easier to do with that. That doesn't mean it can't be done with outdoor art, obviously, but I think it's got to be more thoroughly considered with outdoor art, especially because there's also, we might save money on the art itself in terms of selling it at the end of the season, but then you've got to consider the installation, especially for larger outdoor arts, and we might end up kind of defeating the purpose, I think, from a financial standpoint there. But yes, I still like that idea and think it's something we should at least look at. I also think it has the benefit of kind of lifting up some of the arts in the community as well by helping sell their art as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it probably shouldn't be an idea that we would rely on to make money, right? But we at least probably should not lose money. Commissioner Dorian, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing from Julie as well. One of the things that I think I'm seeing here, though someone can correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like policy P-5.1.3 is suggesting we only want to promote facilities within the city if they are from private sources. So as in, we would not want to explore either a public center or a public-private, which I think then goes against what we are looking at now. So maybe I'm reading too much into that, but the placement of the word private is kind of interesting in that sentence. But then there is also the policy P-5.1.6, which talks about having capital improvement projects have an allowance for art and cultural elements. But I think that is more suggesting that whenever we're building something large, we need to make sure it's got some beautification to it. So I don't know that at the moment we're covering the idea that's come up in the pros plan around having this multi-purpose cultural recreational center.
I
ahead.
agree, it's not quite there yet. 5.1.6 probably gets the closest to it. But, and perhaps it still should stay very general about developing ideas and concepts about how to integrate cultural centers. I think Commissioner Vanderlyn, you brought up the idea of even when there's a future development, there could be ground space available. So it's really keeping it very general, but identifying the need and the synergies that are inherent in combining groups together could be reflected in one of the policies as well.
We have a 1% for art program. And it's nodding, we do.
Oh, that's a King County policy, but I don't know if that's a city.
I'm seeing ordinance, I think this is Kenmore. Ordinance 1-0115. This is right. Anyway, if we do have a 1% for art program, when Shannon says yes, then perhaps we could think about how that intersects with these policies.
I believe that's how Jen Dixon's artwork was purchased for Lock Boom and Tuaclides.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
I can be mistaken here, but I believe that 1% is actually a requirement for public projects.
I think it is, yeah.
I know from a fact in some of our hospital and other clinic buildings, that was an issue we dealt with within. Glad for, happily, it created some nice amenities, and 1% is not a huge amount. It's not gonna upend the project for that amount, but I do think it's a requirement.
Commissioner Macias?
Does objective 5.1 not really make sense with the goal that we just provide Kenmore residents with information about current recreation programming? It feels a bit out of place. And I will glean back to Shoreline's plan. I read that plan and they had a goal specific to increase community access to public art and cultural services. And I don't know if we want to include that maybe as a policy or change that objective to a goal, is that we increase access, equitable access to everybody.
We like to borrow good ideas. Yes.
Commissioners, would you like to hear more from Missy and Julie about the arts program that they are aware of? Yes. Could you tell us more about that, Missy and Julie? One of you, both of you?
Specifically, I guess I did look up a little bit about different places who have done the sale of what is public art, or they just acquire art, and it's not as popular as doing regular public art that stays for a period of time and gets maintained. And the other piece of doing it that way eliminates a little bit of grant opportunities when it's public for sale. And so if the creation of it is strictly for sale, some of the artists that do public work and it gets supported by grants, it wouldn't make them applicable for that type of funding. Or there has to be some kind of workarounds with how it is developed in the first place, and how you do the call for the art. That was what I was able to find, just kind of digging around, looking at the differences between selling it or doing public art as, just installations around the city or town.
I would echo that. I talked to, I forget the gentleman's name over at Wenatchee, who kind of inherited that program after it got set up. And he said they, over time, started to divest from that program for maintenance reasons. I think that having an arts plan is good so that you don't end up with things that you don't want to have to accept. So I would suggest that also, whether that's under an arts commission or something of that nature. But I think the 1% for arts is an interesting thing too, because it can blend in between art and architecture and even civil engineering. There are bridges that are destination places that attract a lot of people in tourism. That, it's a functional thing, but it's also a thing of beauty. So as you're thinking about river crossings and connectivity, you could really blend those things together and make something that's an attraction and a functional, infrastructure piece.
And then another piece is, if you're ever considering developing a creative district through Arts Washington, that is a process. I don't know if you've been through any of the other towns in Washington State that have creative districts. We have one here in Twist. We're one of the smallest ones in the state. Issaquah has one. Connor is considering it, I believe. Anacortes has one. it's just a distinction that's somewhat geographic, but it's also sort of economic and it drives the creative economy. So it's like what you were talking about, how it would talk to maybe your economic development plan. And it does require a commission that oversees it, or a council, an arts council that oversees it. But it does qualify you for some startup grants and for some wayfinding grant and placemaking grants to help implement the public art and bring a cohesive artistic look to the entire community.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, sounds like it's not necessarily a great idea to do the sale for public arts. I guess when I heard that, my thought was more doubling as a way to have art in public spaces that people can look at and also support a art community. Were you mentioning, Julie, were you mentioning concerns around what art is shown? Like there's a potential to not necessarily have a choice around some of the art that's displayed? Or were you getting at something else there?
I think there's usually good policy set up for selecting the artwork. What sometimes happens to municipalities is someone will donate something. And if you don't have a good policy on hand, you end up accepting things that then you don't have a place for. You don't necessarily, it's not bringing the value that you want in your arts program policies. So sometimes having a nice way to decline something is really important.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And I guess my other thought on this was, it seems like a low cost-ish way to the city to direct money to the arts, because I assume the city would basically be paid and then the city somehow pays out. So potentially doing this in combination with like art shows or art competitions or something along those lines. And then maybe you have your panel vote on art and that's what's displayed, and it's displayed for a number of years and there's a set prize, and then you just have an auction and you sell it, and it might not pay for itself, but it might offset some of those costs while also promoting your arts district. That was kind of how I was thinking it might work, or something along those lines, but it sounds like it can vary. It depends. And it also sounds like it may be more hassle than it's worth. But that was kind of how I was envisioning it.
I wouldn't discourage you from the notion of public art, obviously, and to have it and to buy it and to have those things that really are attractive to people, residents and tourists. But I think the extra add of having to recirculate it is, it's been shown to be problematic in some jurisdictions.
I used to work for the city of Linwood for a number of years. And if you are familiar with the 196th corridor, there's some specific gateway intersections that we identified for public art. And I don't know the specifics, maybe Missy or Julie know more into that, because I wasn't in that specific department that did the installation or acquired those, but I was in the planning department that identified the gateway intersections to install those. But so it was a roundabout way, but I know that there's somebody that oversees those and how those are maintained, but I don't know the specifics, so I don't know if either one of you do or yeah, but that's just an example of, something that the city could consider if we have some specific gateways that we want to highlight, say the entrance to downtown or the entrances to the city on the east and west sides. I live east of Woodinville, so Woodinville's got a few of those little things in either roundabouts or on specific key intersections. So it may not be a broadly defined public arts program and maybe some of these other communities that Missy mentioned, like as Anacortes, La Conner, et cetera, but it may be identifying those specific gateway intersections. So that's just another potential opportunity consider.
Commissioner Dorian?
Could we scroll down a bit in goal 5 just so I make sure? Yeah, because we're talking a lot about public art. I'm not seeing much in terms of the policies or the like goal objective policies actually flowing all the way down that talks particularly about public art. It talks a lot about programming and then cultural events and things like that. So if we did want to, and I don't know this is the right place to do it, but if we did want to talk about public art, we might need to think about that within at least a policy, I think. The other thing that stood out to me in the other direction is P-5.1.4, including the park amenities for new trends in recreation here, feels like it might be getting lost a bit when there's the other goals and objectives and policies that talk about kind of updating parks and enhancing parks, like the whole conversation we've been having about things like pickleball courts, et cetera. I feel like that would be better placed under one of those than it is here, because it gets a bit lost here that we might add amenities here, and I'm not sure that I saw that elsewhere. I was looking out for it. I may have missed it, but it's quite a lot of what we've been considering as part of the pros plan is like, what new amenities do we need to add to support recreation trends? So that one I think could do with more optimal placement.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, Commissioner Dorian, I think your point also kind of aligns with a point Commissioner Missy has made about objective 5.1, how a lot of the policies don't necessarily align with that objective. It seems to me like we need at least one more, maybe two more objectives in here. One kind of focused on public art and maybe one focused on supporting, or I think kind of more in line with the objective, but the current objective for information and programming, or information around programming and recreational programming at the arts, and then one on public art, and then one perhaps on maintenance or sustainability of public art programs and its cohesion with private art, or supporting private art in order to have a thriving community on that front. Yeah.
This is something that we may have in a different element, Todd, maybe in the economic development element or the downtown element, but if not, it would be lovely to see something policy around how we use public art to create a sense of place in Kenmore, and how we use it to create connectivity as well, sense of place and connectivity both. And I do, although I do have hesitations about the idea of, selling the public art after a period of time. And it could be something that an arts organization would want to take on as a project, if not the city. So I don't entirely dislike the idea. I wouldn't want to count it out as something that happens in our community. I think for the city, I could see it being challenging. And we do have, for a city of our size, wonderful arts and culture organizations. The Arts of Kenmore, As of Theater, the Kenmore Heritage Society, and I think that we've got support-ish for them here. I don't know. I wonder if we could go a bit further. I do feel like we are lacking in space for them and I don't know if that is elsewhere as like providing spaces. Like we talk a lot about providing spaces for like sports activities or a dog park. Do we have that for our arts and culture organizations? No. That's something we would like to consider. Being a few nods for. Okay.
Not directly relevant, but point of information for folks. Unfortunately, it was just announced today that the organization that runs Give Big is dissolving. So yeah, that's
Okay, anything more on goal 5 for now? No? Nope, Commissioner Wilson, go ahead.
One last thing, maybe not a master plan, but something around citing or identifying locations for a theater or a cultural center or something along those lines. I think we've talked about that a couple times, but I don't think we've mentioned that. And that seems to me like that would be a policy somewhere in this goal under one of these objectives. Yeah, doesn't necessarily have to be a theater, but identify locations for opportunities or something along those lines. Yeah.
Commissioner Macias?
I agree completely. Maybe we make that, maybe we look at that as a separate objective or that we pursue options or continue to pursue options for cultural center, something along those lines. I know we need indoor, right? I wholeheartedly think we should put that in there.
Would you like to take a break?
Say this would be an opportunity before we move on to the next session.
Okay, why don't we take a 5-minute break? And then we will come back to goal 6. We've got 6 and 7. And then would you like to introduce your new goal when we come back from break?
Come to 7. It
After
really is a-
7.
a-
Fantastic. That's what we'll do. We will take a break until 8:49, 8:50. And we'll come back and do goals. All right. It is 8:50. We are back in session. We will start again with goal 6. Engage the community in parks, recreation, and open space decisions and activities. This is also a good goal. Any comments? Commissioner Macias?
I'm sorry, you all hate me. Can we go back to goal 5 or goal 5? I don't know where this fits in, but I think at this point, now that we talked about the cultural center, we should probably talk about this. There is also just a brief mention of the aquatic center in goal 7. And I very much understand that this is a tough thing to add in because of cost or size of the community. However, if we are looking at a broad plan and a 20-year vision and a 10-year vision, I do think that we need to put this in here somewhere. And again, going back to shoreline, aquatic access is similarly to shoreline is inequitable, with the only access in Kenmore is through private organizations. So part of that equity is youth color die by drowning at a much higher rate, and low income don't have access. And I really do feel like we need to address that here somewhere to pursue opportunities for equitable access to all residents with access to an aquatic facility. And I think if the need comes up at some point where we're working with the community and there is a spot for this, that could fit in. And sitting on the dais here, I know almost everyone has said their kids have swam, and now we have no shoreline, we will lose Bothell. So I feel like we need to note this somewhere.
Were you thinking, Commissioner Macias, that it should be in goal 5, or you were?
That was my concern because I don't know where this fits in because there's no mention of it anywhere. But if we add cultural center and if there is some tied to equitable access, then that's where that lies, is equitable access to water sports at all levels. I mean, we have nothing here.
Maybe Todd, could you help us? Not right now, not on the spot, but maybe you could help us figure out where that goes, if not in 5 somewhere else. I agree, that does seem like it's a missing element here. Okay, now on to goal 6. Commissioner Wilson?
Just mentioning, I think this kind of has what I was looking for. I think it was an objective for policy. Oh my gosh, sorry. Goal 2, or sorry, goal, wait, which one is it? Yeah, goal 2 policy or objective. Wait. Right, that one's missing the objective, got it. Sorry, goal 3, under the missing objective around kind of built environment space. I think this might be the spot to put some of that instead.
Does it feel sort of like this whole goals, objectives, and policies section could just really use a good sort? Just a combing through and kind of sorting things to put them together in different ways. It's not that any of them are, some of them I think we can strike, but it's not like I think there's a lot of that. It just seems like they aren't sorted very well.
Yeah, they might be in there just in inappropriate locations and whatnot. So I think just kind of a read through and say, oh, this makes more sense to go under this goal and so on.
Yeah. Commissioner LaSalle?
And for for section 6, for goal 6, under in the policies, they're not duplicative, but there's a significant amount of overlap. There are multiple policies that speak about acquiring lands. There's multiple policies that speak about the funding related to that. There's multiple policies that speak to refreshing the various elements of either PROS or the plans or the master plans or the capital improvement plans, which all are distinct in the details, but essentially are the same thing. It's make sure there's funding, look at what you should acquire, and refresh the plan, the various plans as needed. And in those three aspects, we cover most of the 13 policies that are listed there.
So perhaps as they are being sorted, we would catch redundancies and could eliminate some that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also there's a certain number of those that also echo other policies in the other goal sections that were listed, where it's good to have them summarized and remembered. So it's not necessarily we should remove them because we have them somewhere else. But if we are going to keep them, then maybe have it at a more summarized level because they echo other policies that exist in the other sections.
Commissioner Olson and then Julie.
This is a quick one. I think earlier I was talking about a desire for revising master plans, and I see that 6.1.9. The one thing I would add to this is having maybe some recommended timeline to at least review. This just says as necessary, which I see the intent there, but it seems like having a periodic, have someone look at the master plan to determine if it's necessary every, I don't know, 5 years or 6 years or whatever it is, seems like a good approach to that one. It's just a minor amendment.
I was going to say that since most of these are process oriented, this might be the place to put anything about the arts policies or programs to just to develop some guidelines.
Any other thoughts on goal 6? Okay, seeing none, I think we can move on to goal 7. Create a financially sustainable park and recreation system through partnerships and stewardship. Commissioner Vanderland, then Commissioner Dorian.
This is the finance guys section right here. So not a lot of passion here, but I think that there's some need for improvement here. When I read this, particularly if you read the goal itself, it's very restrictive, particularly when you look at what everything that's listed underneath it. Also within the policies and objectives that go on, a lot of them are, as we already mentioned, repetitive and repeated elsewhere for specific different instances. So what I would suggest is maybe we rewrite, first of all, the goal here to be more specific and a little actually more broad, something along I open this and welcome to words, others wordsmithing. If you have a goal that would read something like identify and implement a stable and durable revenue source for acquisition and maintenance of city PROS assets. I think that's what we're really trying to get at here. And then we would have an objective, which would be similar to the goal here that we have now, which is to identify city and agency partnerships for joint development and maintenance of PROS assets. Then I think the rest of these principles or policies kind of flow underneath them. Some of them are duplicative. But I think this would begin to be a little more active, a little more assertive. It would make a little more sense. The other thing I would suggest staff go through and take a look at the other goals that we have here, which have this sort of still direction, but specific to different instances that are peppered throughout here. I can send you a list of the ones I've looked at, but for instance, 1.13, 1.2.5, 3.16, 3.22, you'll see this sort of thing. And I think having these consolidated into this one objective would make this a lot more sense. And maybe we can eliminate some of them, because I don't think there's any of these or any of the things that we would think of where we wouldn't want to have this sort of control and maintenance objective to it. So calling them out separately may have some emotional impact for those people who care about those. But in terms of what we're writing and trying to put together, I'm not sure it gives us, that specificity gives us anything, but I'm not opposed to having them, every single one of them and every special interest documented here, but I'm not sure it's necessary.
Commissioner Macias?
I had emailed some just like small kind of ticky-tack things, but on policy 7.1.1, we have budget for long-term maintenance and operational costs. Should we include long-term maintenance, operational costs, and required mitigation? Because there's maintenance and there's mitigation on things that we have from state requirements on some of our parks. I just want to make sure we're covered when we're budgeting for those things. And then objective 7.2, I would love to see encourage and pursue multipurpose and or joint use of school, because I know that our schools hold kind of the keys to a lot of our athletic fields, and I want to make sure we're being a little bit more directive that we're pursuing those options. And then same thing with policy 7.2.2, work cooperatively with local jurisdictions. I would like to strike evaluate and pursue the need and financial ability to construct and operate indoor recreational facility and for community need. And I don't know if we want to add an equitable access at the end of that.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Some of the redundancies here, policies 7.1.1, 7.1.2, these seem to me to be duplicative. If you're going to develop and prepare a capital plan, you're going to take into account a budget for long-term maintenance and operational costs. Seems like it's two different ways of saying the same thing. So I would just say it one or the other. 7.1.3, identify and secure appropriate levels of funding to operate or support new city-sponsored recreational programs or facilities. Great. That's one of the things we really seem to have. But prior to making commitments to initiate and implement any new programs, what are we saying here? I think that needs to be deleted. That's ongoing operational. That was my last observation. Well, actually, I'll take that back. Looking at 7.1.6, I think this is an important statement here. Require new development impacting park service delivery to pay its fair share of the cost providing new park and recreation facilities as defined in blah, 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 impact city. I think that's true, and that's something that should be looked at. But when I read this, it seems to be telling me that all of the costs need to be recovered through impact fees. I'm not sure that's what we intended. The other item I would be thinking about, when we talk about a sustainable and durable revenue source, obviously the budget is neither. A dip in the economy dips the sales tax, and all of a sudden we can't maintain our parks anymore or any of our recreational activities. That's the hump we need to get over. How do we come up with a revenue source that is sustainable and durable in the face of what's going to be economic ups and downs? I'll throw a hint out. It's called the Metropolitan Park District, which provides both an ongoing revenue source for maintenance, but also bonding and other revenue sources for ongoing acquisition and capital improvement and maintenance. So I don't know how other commissioners might feel about adding that into this section, but I think it's a natural, one of the few ways you could actually come up with a durable and sustainable revenue source. It's certainly one of the options out there, not the top.
I think it could be a policy to explore a Metropolitan Parks District.
Evaluate.
Mm-hmm.
applicability for Kenmore of establishing.
Commissioner Olson?
Glad you brought that up. I'm shifting gears a little bit. I was looking at policy 7 or objective 7.2, policy 7.2.1. And I think this might apply to the objective as well, but adding explicitly transportation department in here. We have a lot of trail proposals where we're looking at off-street connections and off roadway pathways, but there's also locations where an alternative might be an on-roadway facility, whether that's a cycle track or a shared use path, or repurposing existing roadway or some of those spaces. And so looking to partner with them. I'm also thinking of things like linear parks, which are basically just trails with things to do on them, and green space and other uses. And it also seems like a kind of natural connection and tie-in, especially on some of our main streets where it's almost, I wouldn't say less about transportation. Transportation's still a part of the street, but there's also a big part of it, which is how it integrates with the community. I'm thinking of 181st, which is our main street. Frankly, I am thinking of downtown Bothell. They have a main street that is technically a transportation corridor. You cannot drive through that. You're walking or biking through it. And so making that explicit is something I just wanted to mention there, and what those partnerships might look like.
Anything else on goal 7? Commissioner LaSalle?
I'm thinking that 7.2.9 probably needs to be removed.
Maybe we can
Yeah,
kind
we'll
of put that on a
put a
shelf
pin
for
in it,
now,
and
put a
I'll,
pin in
we'll
it, yeah.
talk with Debbie a little bit more when she comes back. I know that this has been a long-term facility that the city has used with them, so I don't know, I don't want to assume that eliminating this altogether would be a good idea. However, point well taken. We'll circle back.
Mhm. Commissioner Macias?
Going back to Commissioner Vanderling's, I know I read this somewhere. In 7, chapter 7 of the pros plan, it does have a task that says adopt Metropolitan Park District, full text and appendix. It is noted in there. I don't know if we want to go back to that or make that kind of coordinate with it, but I think it's in there.
I do have one comment about maintenance. And I do agree with Commissioner Vanderland that should be in the capital improvement program. And the amount that it gets talked about in our community and the way it gets talked about leads me to believe that it's like a puzzle or a problem we haven't quite solved. Like it's not, we don't have the resources to maintain our spaces the way I think we would like to. And I think the community feels that, and I think staff feels that very acutely. And I think that we can support both our community and staff if we can somehow like crack the nut that is the problem of maintenance. It's a tough one. And I don't know what policy to suggest, except to say that I think if we kind of left it in policy 7.1.2, it would makes it a little bit more unspoken even, and I feel like we might not give it the attention that we really need. I don't even know that policy 7.1.1 is enough. If anyone has any ideas about that, I am open to them. Commissioner Olson.
I'm not sure I have an idea so much as a quote I heard from a professor a while back, which was basically, it's kind of a joke. And the joke is, if you are asked to plan for the future, first ask how long, and the longer it is, charge more money because you're going to get it wrong. It's almost impossible to predict some of these things, and that makes it really hard, which I think was Commissioner Vanderlin's point around a durable revenue source to help pay for these things. It's really hard to plan sustainability on some of these things when the future is unclear and we're going to have ups and downs in the economy and all of these other parts of that. I wouldn't necessarily say that we shouldn't try to prepare for the future. That was the next thing that the professor said, is just because it's uncertain doesn't mean we shouldn't do these things. And in that case, we were looking at like rail in Seattle and how we didn't build it. But and it's something where people are going, well, technology is going to be better. Well, maybe we'll have flying cars. And it's like, well, maybe we will, but we can't rely on the unknown. We should plan with what we have. That being said, so I personally really like the durable language because I think it's planning on the knowns that we have and preparing for the future. I agree that we should definitely keep this in here. I'm almost thinking maybe we combine and then pare down a little bit those two policies and adjust some of the language to be, a consistent and durable revenue source. The other thing that I think I would like to see in here is language around volunteering and promoting other types of city engagement towards maintenance. That can be challenging on roadways and other facilities where traffic control on the lake is needed, but for some public parks and things like that, public volunteer workshops and things like that, I think are something that maybe we should have an explicit policy for, to kind of try and support some of the financial piece of this as well. Sorry.
Do you think, Commissioner Olson, policy 7.1.8 could be changed to fit what you were thinking of, broadened in some way?
I think broadened a little bit is kind of what I'm looking at. We're saying implement a citywide policy for volunteers to help steward parks. I'm trying to think of how I would adjust that. I guess promote, like maybe actively try and identify locations where volunteers might be useful. I think Commissioner Benesinski, you've done a lot of maintenance work at some of our parks to this point, but continuing to kind of, and I think we've got language in some of our other elements around this as well. So maybe I'm being a bit redundant here, but it seems like a spot that it makes sense, not just implement a policy on it, but promote community engagement and community involvement in the maintenance of our spaces. I think it also might help with some of the understanding of why it's hard to maintain these spaces. It's a lot of work and it's expensive to pay people to do that. I'm going to stop talking because I think Todd has a...
Yeah, I was
Yes,
gonna
Todd.
just kind of follow up on that conversation. I think what you're getting at is, we're a small community, so let's leverage those partnerships that we have, that offer their services voluntarily or otherwise. Maybe there's other organizations that we can partner with too, that aren't in Kenmore, but we do have a lot inside of our community. So how do we to leverage all of those resources to help our staff, to help our community keep up on the maintenance? Because it is a huge, undertaking. So I think, it probably would be good to have one, if not a couple, or even, if you want to elevate as much as an objective to focus that, because that is a big part of you know, the focus of our parks system, if you will, is the maintenance and ongoing funding and whatnot. So it may be a catch-all of all of that.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
One of the challenges I think Kenmore has in the maintenance of our parks and recreation activities is the fact that Kenmore residents are not the exclusive users of these
Mhm.
facilities. In fact, a substantial use is by folks who are drawn into our wonderful park system and access to the lake, all of which we want to encourage, we want to increase, and we want to enhance over time. Unfortunately, we've got a free rider issue here that we haven't found a solution to. There isn't probably a good direct solution. Even a metropolitan park district is only going to allow you to generate off of the same Kenmore tax base the money that ought to have been funded through outside users. But there are other ways to get about this, and I'm not sure if this rises to potential of having it as a new objective or not. But when I think through this, how do you cover those free rider costs? Well, one is partnerships. I think you're absolutely right. If we had agreements with the other surrounding cities about, okay, your folks use our parks, our people use your parks, let's work this out so we can have some kind of a stable. And ultimately, you could probably have a metropolitan park district that included more than Kenmore. Not that I'm suggesting that that's where we'd want to go, but that would be a tool that would allow that to happen. Economic development we talked about is another way. If you're generating a significant amount of foot traffic through people being attracted to the use of our parks, that provides an opportunity for business, something that can be taxed and taken advantage of by the city. I'm sure there are other issues out here that other people could come up with, but the primary takeaway for me is that there are kind of soft approaches to how you deal with this problem, and that probably the only approaches we have versus a hard, let's just tax it or put a use fee on it, parking or something like that. But I would challenge staff to think about this and come back with a recommendation. Is this something we would want to add as an objective? If we did, how would we write it? In a way that was not offensive to the people we might want to partner with. But I think this is a tricky one.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, I agree on all of that. I think looking at economic development opportunities, and that is a potential option. I think we've got some in here around partnership, but it almost seems to me like a objective around community involvement and understanding, or promoting community involvement and understanding around maintenance of our parks. And I might even say in that there should be a policy that extends kind of beyond city limits when we're partnering with other cities. Like if this were, let's say it was a metro park district outside the city and it included a few cities in this area or some region, having workshops and programs where people come out to do maintenance to kind of leverage the expertise and experience those folks have on particular days, for instance. That's probably a little too detailed for a policy, but that idea of promoting more of that and more of that cohesion. I also think around potentially having a policy in there around coordination with the economic development element, and looking for opportunities for business development near parks and other facilities to help fund effectively these park systems through city revenues. Yeah, that's it.
I think it is a good idea to have a policy that encourages volunteers and volunteer stewardship, and to acknowledge that that is going to require a level of effort for staff that they don't currently have. It is quite a bit of work to manage volunteers, and so I don't want to. I think harnessing that labor is a positive thing and an overall net good. And also, I think we have to recognize that it does take some resources to make it happen. And then also, as we're thinking about leveraging volunteer labor to help us maintain our parks, we also may want to consider partnerships with other nonprofits where perhaps there is some, cost associated with the work, but it's kind of a leveraged cost. So there are groups that will work with cities to add capacity to do restoration projects, for example. That's a way that we could get more work done. Yeah. Any other thoughts on goal 7? Okay, Commissioner Vanderlyn, I am very excited to hear your new goal idea. Are you,
Which idea?
your new goal idea, are you ready
Okay,
to propose your new goal?
I already did. I read back the language.
You did?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
I think, did you capture it, Todd? Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
so it was
but-
gonna go in, wait, say it again.
So in other words, what I'm suggesting is an editing of the current goal language.
Oh, okay.
So it would read something like, identify and implement a stable and durable revenue source for acquisition and maintenance of city pros assets.
Uh-huh.
And then a objective that would be to identify city and agency partnerships for joint development and maintenance of pro assets.
So
Then you have a bunch of policies that could flow underneath those.
instead of goal 7 or in addition to?
In addition to
In
goal
addition
7.
to,
Basically,
okay.
we're rewriting.
All right, well, I missed
so-
that somehow.
Pardon me?
I missed that you did that. I mean, I heard that you say that, but I didn't realize that was a new,
No,
the
no,
new
I
goal.
wasn't looking that we throw out or replace or add a new, but basically we modernize goal 7 or, goal 7. This was originally written 10 years ago. We were looking at a very different situation. I think we're in a situation now where we can be more concrete and have more options about how we could fund. And we need to recognize we need to spend more time looking at this because it's going to become a bigger issue. And it's such a big part of Kenmore. We need to make sure we have a durable process here.
Mhm. All right. Anything else for tonight? Yes.
So,
Sounds like Commissioner Macias has a question. May we take that
Oh,
first, Todd?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Is there anywhere baked into here? Because I had it in my notes about the senior center improvement, because that also feels like where, and I think that is pretty important. I think that should be somewhere, and I wasn't sure where we fit that in. Where do we note that we want to make, pursue options for the senior center for improvements or look at rebuild, something in that line?
I know we'd all like to get out of here, but I'd like to follow up on it because I think it was excellent. It raised an issue in my mind. When we talk about senior center and what comes immediately to my mind, given Bothel's history and the infrastructure they have in place, that'd be a perfect place for partnership. There are other places around here, opportunities, I think, where we would want to be looking to other jurisdictions around us, cities or agencies about these. Where within our city does that happen? Talk about resources. How do we make that happen? We can write all of this we want, but if there isn't somebody charged with doing this, if this isn't, whether it's part of the development department or somewhere, it's not going to happen. So I'm wondering if that's something that need to be reflected in our goals and our policies and procedures here.
Anything else, Commissioner Macias, on that?
I agree. I think that's why there's a few locations that I'd like to see language from explore or review to pursue. I mean, those are words that are directive words, and I think makes sense that that there's some meat behind there.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
So to follow up on that, so to recap, either last meeting or the meeting before, we've been talking about, or Tom has mentioned, rather than single-use type of facilities, looking at opportunities to have it be a multi-use facility, which might make sense for a smaller community like Kenmore. And that might segue into kind of what I was going to suggest next, which is, whether or not we consider an opportunity downtown or somewhere else. Julie sent me a graphic regarding the downtown area by the post office. And so I might consider having that shown up on the screen, and then we can kind of walk through that. So this might be a good segue to move away from the policies and goals to that discussion while Julie is here this evening. So you guys are okay with that?
Can Julie respond to that and then Commissioner Olson? Or was he?
It's a really quick thing.
Okay,
It's-
Commissioner Olson.
I just wanted to note policy 7 dot, oh my gosh, now I can't find it again. 7.2.7, and then 7.2.8 are kind of in line what I was discussing with volunteer efforts, and I think maybe it's just a reordering thing again. I think there might be a couple of things I talked about that aren't included in that, but just wanted to note that. That's it. We can move on now.
Julie, you had something you wanted to say?
Thank you. Yeah, and I think there's an exhibit, if you can bring that up. There had been a couple questions asked in previous meetings about the post office site and structured parking. So I just quickly overlaid basically kind of a minimum width requirement for a parking garage that we just completed. So don't pay as much attention to the length as the width, because that's kind of your critical dimension. And Todd looked at it, maybe if it shifts slightly to the east, it might just fit in the parcel lines there, but that will just kind of give you a broad sense of whether or not a parking structure would fit. This one in particular has activated ground floor activities, and the parking garage is 3 levels above that. So you don't lose that kind of urban streetscape. And so you just have to figure out where the entrance to the garage is. But, there could be a structure there that housed different either senior center or cultural activities. The main purpose is you have to kind of match the use with the parking requirements, right? So the one thing about rhododendron is that there's the kind of competing uses for the parking, the senior center and the park itself. And if you improved it down there, it would only probably attract more people. So moving it into a location where you maybe even have, memorandums of agreements with other neighboring parking that you can use at different times of the day, or there's certainly other properties downtown that would work. But just to give you kind of a visual of how that might lay out on that particular parcel. That's helpful.
Yes, thank you. And on that note, I heard, I think Commissioner Olson, you mentioned it last week, and it came up again later after that meeting, that there is a parking garage planned for downtown.
I don't know about planned. I think it's more like in our plan.
It's
We
an
brought it up
idea.
before.
Aha.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I wouldn't say it's planned. It's something that I think
Super.
in one of our previous elements, we'd looked at implementing more park once policies as part of the reduction
Yes.
in parking requirements, and focusing more on what do people need and less on we need X number of parking spaces for every business. So that way, hopefully we can activate more business.
Okay. The reason I brought it up was because it would be nice to have an idea, like a holistic idea about what's happening in the corridor as we're planning these structures, so that we don't end up with yet again so much parking, yeah. Okay, I had one thought. Oh, it does feel a little bit to me, I don't know how it feels to the rest of you commissioners, but it does feel a little bit to me like the conversation that we were having about the narrative piece of the pros plan and the goals, policies and objectives is a little like separate. And we've talked about a lot of things in the narrative part of the plan that don't really seem to have been they're not really in the goals, policies and objectives. And I hope that at some point we can bring those two conversations together. Maybe it will come when we have the analysis of like what we have, what our community has, what our community desires, what we can reasonably expect that we might be able to provide. Maybe that will help us tie things together. All right. Anything else, commissioners? Commissioner Dorian and
Just a couple on the post office designs, especially if it's related to the senior center. I would want to know, and I don't know this, but I would want to know how the seniors currently get to the senior center, because we do have this north-south divide in the city. So how we serve, because I think we still have, I forget the name of it, but the community transit that is south, but I guess it would come far enough north that you could get, but those sorts of things I think we'd need to figure out. The other thing I know, when we were looking for an affordable housing space, the post office was kind of nixed because of the importance to the community. So I don't know if there would be plans to relocate the post office, or there would be within the new development, that, like those kind of things I think we'd have to look at. But given that we are short on land, I mean, it is a very optimal, for want of a better word, location. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
I would note that the accessibility from anywhere around the senior center is really inadequate. So even if they can get there by bus, to get from the bus stop into the facility, and even within the facility, that's the kind of the biggest deficiency right now. Those things can be addressed, but there's so many other things, size, location, all those things. Be great to have them in a more proper location.
Right, Todd, could you talk us through our next steps?
Sure. So, like I mentioned last week, so we're in the current kind of review and refinement point of the pros plan. We'll continue the discussions. This is great, by the way, tonight. I felt like this was really helpful. So I'll gather all of our notes, share those with Julie and Tom, and to kind of take a closer look at the goals and policies. The staff will as well, and kind of team up on how we address this. And then so we have next week off, the 16th. Debbie and myself will be back. Tom is still out. Possibly Julie and or Missy may join us. And then on the 23rd, fingers crossed, we'll hopefully get in a position where you feel comfortable, where we're able to move forward with the public hearing on October 7th. We do have some additional components that Tom needs to add, which is the capital facilities list and programming. So that's to come. But I felt like this was really helpful, and hopefully you guys felt that as well, to kind of, look at our current goals and policies. Yeah, there's a lot of repair work that needs to be made, and that's point well taken. So, and then with, like I mentioned, with the pros element, I think that I feel relatively comfortable with taking, when we refine these goals and policies and objectives, that those can then translate or transfer over to the existing pros element. Then what's left is really just some basic narratives, and we don't want to be duplicative, because all the information that we have is going to be in this pros plan. So we may be just referring it wholly by reference. And I think there's a lot of benefits to doing that. So this is one of those opportunities that I see, unlike the other elements of the comp plan that don't really have anything relatable to it, that needs to be all-inclusive in that element, that this could be one and sort of save us some time, which we don't really have a whole lot left at this point. So I think that's where I'm thinking we'll head, but we'll chat more with Debbie and Tom and the team moving forward. So, yeah, so 16th, 23rd, and then fingers crossed the 7th, and then you'll be speaking to the council in the 3rd week of October. So that's kind of where we're at currently.
Great. Anything else for the good of the order? Am I supposed to be asking for a motion to adjourn, or can I just adjourn? No, I'm just going to adjourn then. This meeting of the Kenmore Planning Commission is adjourned at 9:35. Thank you.
Oh,